In last week's video, I talked about clarity that doesn't really last, either because we're just not making a decision or because we make these decisions about our business too quickly, just in the interests of stopping this feeling of discomfort. So what I want to look at this week is what happens next, because most people don't say to themselves, oh, I've avoided a decision, or oh, I rushed this because I was scared. They tend to do something much more subtle than that. They start explaining. Explanations in themselves, they're not lies, they're protective stories. Self-protection. When you're experienced, these types of explanations, well, they sound very reasonable. They don't sound anything like avoidance. They have the sound of maturity. And of course, sometimes they are mature, but often our explanations are what we reach for when a decision would cost us something that we're not quite ready to give up. I want to tell you a story going way back to after I left school at the tender age of 18. I didn't immediately replace that educational path with another. Instead, I worked in a central London bookshop. And from time to time, I thought about my future and I weighed up alternatives, and that was necessary for a while. But there was a point after which thinking just stopped being reasonable inquiry and started to become a form of shelter. I hardly really noticed it at the time, even though I hated that daily commute and feeling like a tiny cog in a massive machine, and that was the problem. Our explanations, they don't announce themselves as an irrational delay. They feel much more like self-care. I see this with clients all the time, frankly. I work with people who are extremely sharp, bright, self-aware, deeply reflective. They can tell you exactly why they haven't acted, and every reason they give me makes sense. But when we look closely, all those explanations protect the same thing: optionality. Now, this may sound a bit strange, but sometimes we want to protect our ability to keep all the doors open. Now, this kind of optionality, well, it feels like freedom, doesn't it? But it prevents commitment. Here's the cost that people underestimate. When we keep explaining instead of deciding, well, nothing collapses immediately, but our energy leaks away. We stay busy, we stay thoughtful, we stay outwardly respectable, but quietly the weeks turn into months. Not because we're lazy, but because no decision is imposing its own reality on us. That experience of being stuck with school behind me and an unknown future ahead was uncomfortable. But because I had a job and I had a structure and I had money coming in, even though I was in a position where I really disliked the job itself and even doing a job, because I'm not really made for employment, I'm made for entrepreneurship, it didn't strike me strongly enough with a sense of urgency. I found myself making excuses to myself and even feeling tempted to stay in that job. After all, it was stable, there was a future, I was learning an expertise, and what I learned really from that echoes through all the way to the work I'm doing today. Now, one of the huge advantages that we have as mature and experienced professionals is that we've got a history to draw from. So just as I drew from my history when I had to work in a London bookshop, I'd like you to pause this video and crack out a piece of paper or the electronic version. You'll notice I'm using electronic paper to save trees, as you can see in a rain-soaked Portuguese background, crack out that piece of paper and just think back, perhaps to your own childhood years or teenage years or late, early 20s maybe, that time of life where we're still forming our personality. And think of a decision that you had to make. Mine was between school and what effectively became drama school. It could be that for you. It could be whether you were going to get married or not. It could be whether you were going to buy a house. It could be anything that felt like a big decision. And notice what you said to yourself, how you explained that. If you were also keeping all the doors open, and just jot down some of those thoughts. That's the first exercise. And then when you've done that, come back and play the next section. All right, I hope you've done that. Now, the next section is to ask yourself, am I still using those types of structures, those kinds of explanations in delaying the decision-making in my own business life? And if you are, then, like me, that realization should strike you physically, emotionally, mentally, at a deep level. And in my case, and I would hope in yours, it will drive you forward into making that decision. Here's a test I use. It's not a trick, it's not a template, it's not a framework. If you remove all of your explanations, then what decision becomes unavoidable? Now, if the answer is nothing at all, then you're not yet at that decision point. But if something immediately becomes uncomfortable, then that's a signal that you probably are. Now, clarity, when it fades away, it doesn't usually fail with a fanfare of trumpets. It fails politely through the good reasons and our thoughtful pauses and our very responsible explanations. Now, if you recognize yourself in any of this, that's not a flaw, it's a signal. And there's a short sequence I'll put a link to below that helps you really notice where your explanations are protecting you from these decisions, not to rush you, but to stop you drifting and to start true momentum. Take it anytime you feel ready.